also says February 27th, which it's not.
But that's when this particular session was done.
Hey, so we don't have to mask anymore?
Correct.
Oh, it's optional. Everybody, huh?
We're going for coffee?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure. We discussed so many things, I wasn't sure.
We don't have to mask now.
We don't.
I didn't know. I just, that's what everyone's saying. Don't, you do. It's optional. It's not. I'm so confused. In general, and this in particular. I don't know what happened. Oh yeah, we're going for full matter.
You know, I haven't seen you in a while, but you look fabulous.
Oh, thank you. It's amazing, you know, what a little makeup and jewelry. It takes so much longer to put it all on.
Thank you.
Seriously, seriously.
I don't know if it's your haircut or whatever, you look
Probably just
really
wait,
great.
just going haircut. I'll go for the haircut, thank you.
Okay. Hello.
I missed Where do you want me? Yes, that's what I said. That's what I'm doing.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
It's nice to see you. It's nice to see some people here. I know from a number of people that they're traveling and that they cannot be with us, but there are other people. Shavua Tov, it's not Shabbat, it's Sunday.
I'm not
I am not going to wear it, and I'm going to stay away. I'm going to stay here. So that, but we are asking for people to be masked here, if that's okay.
Oh, okay.
So as I always do, I'm going to remain distanced. But as a number of people have said to me, if I am not masked, they have trouble hearing me. So even with a microphone. So I'm going to remain unmasked, but you should know that I'm being tested I test myself weekly. So, and I want you to know that not only am I vaccinated, but I wouldn't come here if I were either symptomatic or if I had a positive test. But in any event, I will remain distanced and remain here, and I'm going to ask for everyone to be, please, masked. There is a microphone here for anyone to ask questions, and I am thrilled to be back here. I haven't been back here with all of us for a number of weeks. In fact, I'm not going to be here for another couple of weeks because next week I am traveling to Israel. So I'm going to be in Israel for about a week. This is the time of our winter break. And as you know, I will be back here afterwards, but then we have Passover. So yes, I know, the wonders of the Jewish calendar. So we're going to have a little bit of a disruption in our learning, but it's all good. And I appreciate your being here, and I appreciate being able to do this. And I appreciate people being out there at home. We have people watching us from 4 states and 3 countries. So that's pretty good. And thank you for being with us. It's really lovely. So I wanted to take this moment to conclude what we have been doing in terms of the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. And you know that what we have been doing doesn't do justice to any one of our scrolls, including, of course, the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. This is our 15th session in this series, and we are studying the 5 scrolls. We started with a Song of Songs, we moved on to Ruth, we moved on to Lamentations, Eicha, which we read on Tisha B'Av, and now we've moved on to Ecclesiastes, and we've taken approximately 4 sessions per scroll, and this is our 4th session on the Scroll of Ecclesiastes, and we're about to move, around the time of Passover, how fitting, to the Scroll of Esther, which we read in Purim. But we're going to talk about this. We're going to figure out why we can kind of explain it to ourselves. But in the meantime, I wanted to conclude our learning with regard to Ecclesiastes. And I do so with mixed feelings. I have a very difficult time with Ecclesiastes, and I also love this scroll. I love this text. And we're going to talk about a little bit of what this means to us and why and what all of this is like in terms of the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. And today I hope we're going to have a little bit of a summative session about the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. I hope that we come to a point of truly understanding what Ecclesiastes is about, following everything that we've learned before. So thank you again for joining us, and let's continue. We're going to do this in the way that we've been doing it thus far. And so, good. For those of you who are not on our mailing list and who would like to be on our mailing list, including people who are online and perhaps watching us from home or wherever you may be, please reach out to Joanna Cullinan. It's jcullinan@ttti.org. And, you know, I just want you to see this for a moment on the screen so that people have an opportunity to write this down. Okay? And as importantly, or more importantly, okay, and I'm gonna move now. If you have any questions, if you have any comments during the session, you're home, you're not here, but you would like me to respond to your questions, please email me your questions at jcohen@ttti.org. My phone is on, it's right here. I will look at the phone on a couple of occasions during the session and at the conclusion of the session. If there are any emails, I will address your questions here, and I will hopefully be able to respond to them. And if you wish, you can also send me emails after this session. I'll be happy to talk to you about any of the material that we're covering. So for people who are here, there's a microphone right here. I'm going to ask you to use it when you ask your questions so that people at home can hear us. And for those of you who are at home, please email me and I will be happy to respond to your comments or questions. Okay, let's start with a summary of where we've been and talk about where we're going. Okay, so here is our review. And I didn't say this, but I see a number of you have Bibles. We're going to look at our Bibles. We're going to take a look at our Bibles. If you wish, you can take Bibles. If not, there's going to be material for you on the screen. Let's take a look at where we've been. If we've learned anything about the Scroll of Ecclesiastes, it is that it is a subversive text. And as I've explained to you, it really is the first biblical propaganda text. And it is a text that is finally composed and redacted, we believe, in the turn of the 4th to the 3rd century before the Common Era. In other words, it's a relatively late text. And it's a relatively late text where most of the redaction occurs at that time, with minor elements of redaction a little bit later, as the whole of the Hebrew Bible is canonized. And it is a text that responds to Greek philosophy, to Greek science. And I want to really emphasize this right now. And all of this should sound familiar to you, because we've spoken about it. But it's really important because Greek philosophy and Greek science are the root or the seed of our humanism. What do we mean by humanism? We mean our faith in the human capacity to learn about the world, to observe the world, to learn about the world, to understand the world, and to make a difference in our own lives and in the world. In other words, what are human science and philosophy about? Progress. Making things better. The Greek idea of science, the Greek notion of science, the technological innovation that comes from Greece, the roads, the aqueducts, the tremendous progress in metallurgy, all of this great technological innovation that comes from Greece, and let alone other innovations that we would speak about but are right now not going to talk about, the alteration of our learning during the Greco-Roman period, from the scroll to the book, and the technological innovation that this entails, and the cheapening of the reproduction of learning materials, enabling more people to do learning. All of these things are so compelling that Greek science and philosophy conquer the world. The entire known world is shaped by Greek culture and the strength of Greek culture and everything that it has to offer. So when we think about the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great and so on and so forth, we tend to think about military conquests. It's much more than military conquests. You think about the past century, and many people have termed the past century the American century, right? It's not just about America winning the Second World War. It's about the innovation that's come from America. It's about the institutions. It's about democracy. It's about the promise of America. It's about culture, right? The same went for Greece. The same went for Greece. And what the Hebrews, those Judeans, saw in Greece was therefore a threat to their national identity, to their culture, and to their religiosity. And the book of Ecclesiastes, as we've explained, is a response to this. It uses the language of Greek science, the language of Greek philosophy, the language of ancient Near Eastern wisdom, all of these combined in order to demonstrate the limitations of philosophy and of science and of wisdom. In other words, Ecclesiastes, presumably in the way that Ecclesiastes is written, right, presents itself as having been written by King Solomon, the great philosopher, the great student, the wisest person who ever lived, to undermine wisdom and science and philosophy. In this respect, Ecclesiastes is a propaganda text. And the first and one of the most effective ones ever written. Right? And we talked about this. Yes? And this should sound familiar. Right? And we talked about the implications of this for us and the challenge of this for us as Reformed Jews, as people who believe in wisdom and in science and in philosophy and who understand that we can learn from other cultures around us. We would be open to Greek philosophy. All of you know, Rabbi Klein wrote his PhD dissertation on Greek philosophy. I mean, we study Greek philosophy, right? Yes? Right? And we talked about this. So, what are the main themes that we touched on? We touched on the theme of nature, and we talked about nature. Remember the very beginning of the Scroll of Ecclesiastes? Remember we spoke about this? Hevel havalim hakol hevel, says Kohelet, right? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, says Ecclesiastes, says Kohelet, right? Kol hanechalim zormim el hayam vehayam einenu maleh. All the streams flow into the ocean, and the ocean is never filled. Right? The wind turns from south to east to north to south, and we cannot control its turning. The sun rises, the sun sets, the seasons come, the seasons go. This is nature. Nature is cyclical, and it never gets anywhere, and we cannot interfere. We don't know what is happening in the world. The world turns around us. All we can do is observe and stand in awe of the natural world. Right? Yes, we can look at it, we can study it, we can examine it, we cannot change it. We will not alter it. Nature is big and strong, and we are small. Right? And the world is created by God. And who are we? We are finite. Right? Remember we spoke about this. Yes? Does this ring a bell? Good. Wonderful, okay? So we talked about nature, we talked about our ability to understand it, but our smallness in comparison to nature. We talked about the notion of justice. Remember we spoke about justice? That justice is not done in this world, that we cannot anticipate justice to be done in this world, that the poor person who gives good advice to the besieged city will never be remembered. There are going to be no plaques in the temple for poor people, right? This is not, the people we put on plaques. Buildings are named for the wealthy. Buildings are named for donors, not for the people who are necessarily wise or who do good. Don't expect justice. Don't expect recognition in your lives, says Ecclesiastes. Right? And know that you will not be remembered, says Ecclesiastes. Remember we saw this? In 200 years' time, who will know our names? No one will know our names. No one will remember us. How many people are ultimately remembered? Very few. Very few. Right? And then many who are remembered have their statues toppled after a time. Right? We are seeing that too. Right? Don't expect for justice, and don't expect a legacy. Don't expect to be remembered. And is that fair? It's not fair. It's an outrage. But that's the world we live in. Right? So, we want to believe in justice. We want to believe in goodness. We want to believe in fairness. We want to believe that we will have a legacy. We want to believe all of these things. But Ecclesiastes says, I wish I could promise it to you, but I cannot. Right? What does the rest of the Hebrew Bible tell us? Do the right thing and everything will be okay. or not, says Ecclesiastes. Right? Yes? Remember this? We spoke about this, and it was challenging, and we grappled with this material, and we thought about this, right? And I'm not going to repeat everything that we said, but I'm summarizing. And then, after this notion of just reward in our lives and beyond our lives, and the notion of legacy, there is another issue that, of course, Ecclesiastes touches on, that we speak about, which has to do with then what is left for us. What do we have in our lives? Right? In certain ways, Ecclesiastes is the first existentialist philosopher. Right? And so much of existentialism, including 20th century existentialism, Sartre, Camus, all the great existentialist thinkers and philosophers draw on Ecclesiastes. Right? He says, what's left for us? The here and now. Remember we read this? Take care of yourselves. Anoint your heads with oil. Wear clean clothes. Make sure to take care of yourselves. Take care of your bodies. Take care of your souls. Make sure that you offer yourselves a sense of how important you are. Right? And tend to your relationships. Enjoy every moment of love. Enjoy every moment of relationship. Cherish every moment. Because it's a gift to us. Right? This is what we have. It's here. It's now. Don't look to the future. Don't look to the goodness that is to come. Don't look to Gan Eden, right? The Garden of Eden. Don't look to some paradise. This is here. This is now. Live here and now. Enjoy in relationship. Yes? Right? Remember we talked about this. Which led us to the last big theme that we spoke about before we parted. And that was wisdom. Right? And we spoke about wisdom. And we saw exactly how subversive Ecclesiastes was. Where in Ecclesiastes, on the one hand said, I have been looking for wisdom, searching for wisdom, studying, examining, looking, right? Probing. I have probed everything, I know everything, right? And cites all the words, the four elements of the world, right? The world is made of, right? Water, earth, wind, air, and fire, right? Yeah, and cites all of these and talks about all of this stuff, all of the science, and says, Mosif da'at, mosif mach'ov, the more I learn, the more pain I experience. And the writing of books is very demanding and at the end of the day not worthwhile. Don't bother writing books. Don't bother doing it. And at the end of the day saying to us, what do we have left? Faith in God. Be faithful unto God. How do we tie all of this up? How do we summarize what cannot be summarized? Like the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. Right? I mean, we could spend a year studying only the Scroll of Ecclesiastes. I suggest we do that by looking at Ecclesiastes on time. What does time mean for Ecclesiastes? We haven't spoken about time yet. And in the context of time, to really think about how all of this ties together. All right? You ready? Yes, you ready for a small discussion on time? Okay. All right. Let's start with our general biblical view, some general biblical views on time. And this is not everything, but it's a little bit. How do we understand our human interaction with time? Now, I have to start with this passage out of Deuteronomy chapter 11, which is in the third Torah portion of Deuteronomy, because in our traditional liturgy, this is part of our Shema. Traditional Jews say this every single day. For those of you who attend also conservative temples or who grew up in conservative temples, this is part of our Shema sequence. You know that the Shema sequence has 3 paragraphs. We read 1, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha, right? We read that paragraph. But there are 3, right? This is part of the Shema sequence taken out of Deuteronomy 11. There's also Lo tatu acharei levavchem v'acharei nafshechem out of the book of Numbers. I'm not going to go into that, but there is this. This is part of the Shema sequence. We read this every day, right? Some of us pray this every single day. So, what does it say? And it starts with an if-then statement, right? All of us have learned in, our computer science classes and in our logic classes, if-then propositions, right? So this is a biblical if-then proposition. If you obey my commandments, says God, that I enjoin upon you, loving God and serving God with all your heart and soul, then what will I do? What will God do? This is a little bit difficult to see, though James, thank you James, has tried to fix the coloring. I will grant the rain for you in its time. The early rain and the late rain. The rain will come in its time. Venatati metar artsechem be'ito. I will grant you the rain on your land, in its time. You do your piece of the covenant. I, says God, will do my piece of the covenant. You love me with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. The rain will come in time. I will do my piece. Nature will follow its course. Everything will be okay. What does it mean that nature will follow its course? That our lives will be predictable. We will know when it's going to rain and when it's going to snow and when it's not going to stop raining and stop snowing. So we will know it's not going to snow on Mother's Day. It's not going to snow on Memorial Day. We don't know, but maybe, right? But we, you think about this, everything will come in its season. What does it mean? It means we can plan. We can figure things out, right? And what does that mean? We can farm better. We can produce more. We can tend to our cattle better. We can do better because we know, we can plan. We have a sense of what's going to happen with the natural world, right? You shall gather in your new grain and wine, and I will provide grass in the field for your cattle. In other words, we will have plenty. Everything will be good. Nature will do its thing and be our partner, right? Now, the other piece of it, and I'm not putting in the whole paragraph, is guard yourselves. Hishamru, it says. Guard yourselves, right? Not to be lured away from serving, to serve other gods and bow to them, because then God's anger will flare against you, shutting up the skies. There will be no rain and the ground will not yield its produce. You will soon perish from all the good land that God assigned to you. Right? In other words, there's a two-sided idea here. Right? Either things will happen in time or things will not happen in time. But let me ask you the question, who is this up to? It's up to us. Don't look to God. Did you fulfill your part in the covenant? Did I fulfill my part in the covenant? Right? It's up to us. Right? Don't go about destroying the environment and then telling me that the climate is changing. Right? Wait a minute. Yes? Do you see what is going on here? Do you understand what is going on here? Right? We have a say in the way nature functions. We can influence the way nature functions. It's remarkable. This is the Deuteronomic view of the world. Do the right thing and it will be okay. It will be okay. Trust things to be okay. We need to do the right thing. We need to do our part. And the Deuteronomy says, you know what? You've never truly fulfilled your part in the covenant. Give it a try. Try it. Listen and try and do what you need to do. Yes? You get the point. You get the idea here, right? Okay. And then we come into a repetition of the Shema from chapter 6 of the book of Deuteronomy, right? All of this, impress these words on your heart, bind them as a sign on your hand, let them serve as a symbol on your forehead, and so on and so forth, right? Reciting them, right? But what is the end of the paragraph? Take a look at the end of the paragraph. So that you and your children may endure in the land that God swore to you and your fathers and your mothers to assign to them as long as there is a heaven over the earth. In other words, what is this covenant? What are we saying here? Not only I will bring the rain in its time, but what is going to be the nature of the covenant? Timeless. This is going to last as long as you hold up your part of the covenant. It's timeless. In other words, the notion of time here is deeply significant. Deeply significant. You see this? Yeah, you understand what's going on here? And we can affect things happening in time and things being predictable. Right? Take care of yourselves. Take care of the covenant, take care of your institutions, and national elections will take place every 2 years. And presidential elections will take every 4 years. And take care of yourselves and everything will be okay. And there is going to be predictability and things are going to move according to plan and we're going to know. And the sun will shine in the summer and the rain will fall in the winter and the snow. And it will be okay. Yes? In brief, a summary of the view of the Deuteronomist. But it's not so easy. I wish it were so easy. I wish it were quite so clean and promising and wonderful, right? But there's more, right? Let's take a look at a little bit more specifically about time. Let's take a look at this. Now, again, I'm offering you snippets. Hosea, the prophet, the so-called minor prophet Hosea, is actually one of the earlier prophets we have information about. Hosea lived in the 8th century before the Common Era, or the material comes to us from a Hosea who lived in the 8th century before the Common Era. And his writings were redacted if he didn't live through, if Hosea didn't live through the destruction of the kingdom of Israel, his writings were redacted after the destruction of the kingdom of Israel. So, if you recall, there were two kingdoms where Israel had been in the ancient world. There was Israel and Judah. And if you recall, Israel is destroyed by Assyria. The Assyrian Empire conquers the whole of Lebanon and Israel, and destroys the capital of Israel in Samaria in the year 722-21 before the Common Era, toward the end of the 8th century before the Common Era, right? So Sancheriv, the great Assyrian ruler and military leader, captures Samaria after almost 2 full years of siege and Samaria, which was a magnificent city, is destroyed. The whole kingdom of Israel is destroyed. And as we said, you remember we talked about this, Israel is the larger kingdom between Israel and Judah. Right? Israel is the more important kingdom. Israel is the more wealthy kingdom, right? And the more numerous, the more prosperous kingdom as well. And it's completely destroyed by Assyria. Right? And Judah somehow survives. Right? The Assyrian armies encircle Jerusalem, but Jerusalem for some reason doesn't fall, and we talked about this on another occasion, but Israel is destroyed. Here is what Hosea has to say about Israel. Now take a look at this. Israel is a ravaged vine. Its fruit is equal to it. When the fruit was plentiful, Israel made altars aplenty. When the land was bountiful, cult pillars abounded. In other words, Israel engaged in idolatry. Israel didn't follow God. Israel engaged in idolatry. Right? All of these altars, all of these pillars, now that it's defeated, its bows are broken. Right? Israel feels its guilt. It pulls apart its own altars, smashes its pillars. Now the ones who are left, the few who are left, are suddenly waking up, right? Truly now they say, look at the time. I didn't highlight every single time. It says now, but look at the time issues that occur here. After the defeat, now what is happening? We have no king. We've been completely defeated. There is no king of Israel. And by the way, if there were a king of Israel, how much use would it be to us? We do not fear God, right? We have not listened to the covenant of God. We have not. What would a king do for us? A king couldn't defend us. We failed to uphold the covenant, says Hosea. Right? Now we're waking up. Now, too late. We're waking up. Yes? But there's more, right? There's always more. So they conclude agreements. The Israelites tried to negotiate their way out of this. They make agreements, they conclude agreements and all the rest of it, but it's all with the idea of self-preservation. And they will do anything they can to preserve themselves. False oaths, bad faith. They will do anything they can to preserve themselves. Is this the way we ought to go? This is what we need to be doing for those who are left. By the way, don't worry because you'll be expelled too, he later says to them, right? It's people and priestlings whose joy it once was all of the fields and all of the wealth and all of the goodness of Israel, which was so much more plentiful than that of Judah. Remember, Judah is mostly desert, hills, mountains, desert. Arid, right? Israel not, right? All of it is not going to do any good. All of it is not going to do any good. And what is going to happen is that everybody is going to be expelled, and the goods of Israel will flow to other powers. They will be taken as tribute, as tax to Assyria and to other powers. Everything will go to waste, right? And you will be unhappy. Ephraim shall be chagrined, and Israel will be dismayed. Now, says Hosea, so here is what I say to you. Sow righteousness for yourselves, reap goodness, break for yourselves new fields. It is time to seek God. Et lidrosh et Adonai. It is time to seek God. Wake up. You have been defeated. Your time is now to do the right thing and to seek God. Don't continue down this terrible spiral that you're engaging in. Now is the time to return to the covenant in spite of the defeat. Because God is still there. In spite of the defeat. Now is the time to seek God. Seek God and wait. Wait for what? Until God or God's representative, it doesn't say arrives, until someone or something arrives. It doesn't say who or what. A teacher of righteousness. Moreh tzedek, a teacher of righteousness. Right? Do the right thing and wait. In other words, what is the time? The time is now to do. The time has come to act. It's come to change course, right? For those of you who have Bibles, Hosea chapter 10 is a magnificent chapter. I don't know what page it is on, but you can take a look at it. The language is magnificent. And what does Hosea say to the people of Israel? You can alter the course of history. If you do the right thing, you can alter the course of your lives. Yes, you've been defeated. Yes, you've been expelled. Yes, this is the situation in Israel. Yes, the good of Israel, the wealth of Israel is all going to other powers and to Assyria, but you can change the course of history. There's something you can do. Start by seeking God, right? There is something you can do about it. Don't sit back and think, oh no, I have to take care of myself and of my children. Do the right thing. I don't know what page it's on. Do you know what page it's on? 997. 996, 997. All right? Take a look at Hosea. Chapter 10 of Hosea is beautiful. It's just beautiful. And it's really the crux of his entire prophecy. Right? Yes? So far, so good? The time has come to act. Right? This is close to the Deuteronomist. It's not too far from the Deuteronomist. Right? The Deuteronomist says, if you do the right thing, the covenant will last forever. Hosea says, we broke the covenant, we're paying the price, now do the right thing, maybe it will be reestablished. Wait. Good things will happen. We're now at the bottom, maybe we will rise up further again. Yes? So far, so good? Okay. Very hopeful. Good message. Now we turn to Haggai. Haggai is a later prophet. Haggai lives at the turn of the 6th to the 5th century before the Common Era, in the time of King Darius. Now, who knows about King Darius? What is the claim to fame of King Darius, the Emperor Darius of Persia? Does anyone know? Yes, the Battle of Marathon. Very good, Ellen. Wow. That's exactly right. So Darius pushes into Greece, pushes into Asia Minor and into Greece, and defeats the Greeks in a number of battles. And eventually, at the Battle of Marathon, encounters an army of 9,000 to 12,000, we believe, Greek soldiers, and a coalition of Greek armies that stops King Darius, that defeats him in battle. Marathon is one of those great, great moments in Greek history. And in reality, had it not been for the Battle of Marathon, the Greeks believe there would be no Greece. Right? This is the turning point for the Greeks. And they believe in their power now to stop the Persians. And this is the beginning of what will become the Greek Empire. Right? With the defeat of Persia. Marathon itself falls. And remember, of course, the runner, after which we have the marathon. But yes, that's King Darius. Darius the Great. Wonderful. What else does Darius do that Darius is famous for? Darius allows for the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. Darius makes good on the promise of Cyrus to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and allows for funds to go for the rebuilding and the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem, and for Judeans to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple. So Darius is a ruler whom we think highly of. We like Darius, right? Because unlike the Babylonians who destroyed the temple, the Persians, Cyrus and Darius, come after him, and they want to maintain cultural and religious autonomy within their provinces, including for the Judeans, right? Because they believe it's better politics. And this is how people are going to be loyal to them, right? So Darius says, okay, go out and rebuild your temple in Jerusalem. How do I know? Because I read Haggai, one of the minor prophets of the 12 books. It says that in a number of places, but one of them is Haggai. And here is chapter 1 of Haggai. in the second year of the rule of Darius, the Emperor Darius, what happens? The word of God comes through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, the leader of the community, right? Son of Shealtiel. And everybody says, everybody, all the Judeans, everyone in exile, everyone in Judah says, the time has not yet come for the rebuilding of the temple. We need a sign from God. A sign of God has not yet come. We don't know that it's time to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, right? The time hasn't come yet. It's not going to happen, right? And what does Haggai say to them? No, don't say that. Wait a minute. You are sitting in your houses while my house, says God, lies in ruin? Wait a minute. You go to your homes and you're building your homes and you're improving your homes and you're building a new addition and you're building a swimming pool in the back, and my house in Jerusalem is burnt and lies in ruins? Where are your priorities? Look at the change in Persian policy towards the Judeans. Seize the opportunity. Now is the time. What do you mean the time hasn't come? Right? Yes? By the way, remember the debate over Zionism in the late 19th and early 20th century? Right? Remember that all of these religious, traditional Jews, Haredi Jews, were saying, the kingdom of Israel can only be reestablished after the coming of the Messiah. It's not yet time for Zionism. Don't push history. Don't make this happen, right? Remember that so many Jews were anti-Zionist because the time had not come, right? And here, what does God say to the prophet Haggai? Oh, you guys are doing really well for yourselves, right? Look at your McMansions. Look at the additions you're building on your houses. What about me? What about my house, says God, right? Okay? And here you see the words of Haggai saying, now here's what God says. Consider how you have been faring. You think that you're doing so well? Look at you, right? You're running like the hamster on the hamster wheel. You keep running and trying to do well. You drink without getting your fill. You clothe yourself, but no one gets warm. You know, your wallet, your purses are leaky. You keep earning money and it dissipates. Where is the money? Where does the money go? We buy one thing, we buy another thing. Where does all this money go? Right? Look at what you're doing to yourselves. You have become consumers, says Haggai. You live the lives of consumers, right? Consider how you have fared. Now, go up to the hills and get timber. Now, go out to the hills and build my house. Go up to the hills and restore. Go up to the hills and take part in something that is bigger than you are, that transcends your self-interest, says Haggai, right? From the turn of the 6th to the 5th century. Rebuild the house. Then I will look on it with favor and I will be glorified, said God, and so on and so forth. Again, magnificent. I don't know what page is the first chapter of Haggai, but 1079. 1079. Again, just magnificent language, magnificent message, magnificent poetry. And what is the message? The time has come. Alter the course of history. Get up and do something. Don't just get by. Don't just get along. Do something for a greater cause, for a bigger cause. Why? Because the time is now. The time has arrived. Look around you. Cyrus, Darius, this is the time. Yes? Do you understand what's going on? Do you see this? Good. Okay. Now we're going to go even further. We're going to go even further, and I'm going to do this really briefly, and I'm going to explain why. because we're entering into Psalm 119. Who knows what Psalm 119 is? Does anyone know what Psalm 119 is? I'm sorry? It is the chapter with the largest number of verses in the whole of the Hebrew Bible. Okay? Psalm 119 is very, very long and very beautiful. And one of these days, all being well, we will read large parts of it together. I cannot go through the whole of Psalm 119 with you because it's huge. We're not going through 170 to 180 verses. We're not doing that. Certainly not today. One day maybe, over time, but not today. So here are snippets of Psalm 119. Here is the psalmist. I long for your deliverance, says the psalmist, right? I hope for your word. My eyes pine away for your promise. I say, when will you comfort me? God, when? Right? You remember what we said before? You remember Hosea? Turn to God, seek God, and wait. Right? The psalmist says, what do you mean wait? When, God? I am looking for you. I'm seeking you. I'm calling you. I believe in you. When will you comfort me? I have become like a water skin dried in smoke. Do you know what a water skin is? A nod is the kind of water tank that people used to carry water in that was made out of animal skin, right? Yes, but when the animal skin tank that allows us to carry water with us is dry, what happens? It wrinkles and it starts to crack and it leaks, right? So I'm like the water skin that is now affected by smoke, right? Dried in smoke. I've not neglected your laws. How long has your servant to live? How many days, how many years do I have? I don't know. How long will I be waiting? When will you bring my persecutors to judgment? When will you help me, God? Right? Says, right? There's a question of time here. When is this going to happen? Right? When is all of this going to happen? And this is what the psalmist says, of course, in exile. Though they almost wiped me off the earth, I did not abandon your precepts. Look at how good I am. I believe in you. I pray to you. I know your steadfast love preserves me so that I may keep the decree you proclaimed. God exists forever. You are timeless, and I know that I am not, says the psalmist. Your word stands firm in heaven. Your faithfulness is for all generations. Again, this notion of timelessness of God as opposed to our time. You have established the earth and it stands. All stands this day to carry out your rulings, for all are your servants. I get it, says the psalmist. I understand what's going on here. I get it. This is what you want from us, and I get it. Look, and I'm only offering you, again, just brief snippets of this. My flesh creeps from fear of you. I'm in awe of your rulings. I've done what is just and right. Where have I failed, God? I haven't failed. I've done everything right. Do not abandon me to those who would wrong me. Guarantee your servant's well-being. Do not let the arrogant wrong me. My eyes pine for your deliverance, your promise of victory. Deal with your servant as befits your steadfast love. Teach me your laws. I am your servant. Give me understanding that I might know your decrees. Help me, God. Where are you? When is your help going to come? And then, Et la'asot la'Adonai, immediately following this. Really one of the most important verses that single verses we will read. Chapter 110, verse 126, I'm sorry. Et la'asot la'Adonai, heferu toratecha. It is time to act for God. It is time to act for God. For they have broken, they have undone your instruction, your Torah, your covenant. It is time to act for God. Why is this so significant? The rabbis took this verse, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail, But the rabbis took this verse and said, this verse allows us, in times of emergencies, in times of hardship, to break the commandments for the sake of the survival of Judaism. To act in ways that are, what does it mean it's time to act? It's always time to act. The psalmist keeps acting. The psalmist prays, they keep kosher, they do whatever they act, right? They act. What does it mean it's time to act? It's time to act beyond the usual action. It's time to take extreme measures, say the rabbis, for your covenant has been undone, right? Which becomes very deeply problematic. But we're not going to talk about that right now. What I'm suggesting is there is a judgment here with regard to time. Where are we? We're in exile. We're powerless, right? We don't have autonomy. We don't have our own politic. We don't have our own king. We don't have our own rulers. We're not in charge, right? What are the implications? It's time to act. It's time to take some measures. Time to do some things that are deeply, deeply unusual. Right? So for Hosea, it was time to act after Israel was destroyed by Assyria and Samaria fell. For Haggai, it was time to act when Darius said, okay, I'm open to your rebuilding your temple in Jerusalem. Right? And some people were saying, no, it's not the time. God hasn't given us a sign yet. We don't know. And Haggai says, look, Darius is saying he's willing to help us. What are we waiting for? We're doing well. Our homes are okay. Let's take care of God's house. Right? And here you have the psalmist going even further, saying, there is no sign. We're not just going to wait for God's covenant to be renewed. We're not going to just seek God in the words of Hosea. We're not going to look at the political circumstances and come to the conclusion that now is the time to act because it's the right time, because the policies have changed. Right? Rather, nothing has changed. And we have on our own to take extreme measures. Yes? In other words, what does time here represent? What is our human interaction with time, and what does it represent in the texts that I'm demonstrating to you, that I'm bringing to you today? Our evaluation of time, our sense of time, our understanding of this moment in time demonstrates to us where we are in a way that allows us perhaps to predict what is going to happen in the future. Time is always measured vis-a-vis the covenant. Always. Our human interaction with time represents our moment vis-a-vis the covenant. And therefore, everything we do in the context of our evaluation of time, our circumstances within time, everything we do has to represent our interest in advancing, reestablishing, recreating the covenant. Right? You see this here? You understand what I'm saying? Do you see this? Yes? Throughout our biblical literature, do you understand what this is? Until we come to Ecclesiastes. Until we come to Ecclesiastes. Now, let's take a look at Ecclesiastes and understand how revolutionary Ecclesiastes is. Right? At every single time, the prophets say, it is time. Now act. Now take a look at Ecclesiastes. These words should be familiar to you. Chapter 3 of the book of Ecclesiastes. There is a season for everything, a time for every experience under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot the planted. Are you familiar with this? Is there anyone who doesn't know this? Okay, right? Now read this for a moment and tell me, where is chapter 3? Do you know what page it's on? Chapter 3 of Ecclesiastes? Because what we do here in our movement, and most Jews do, is only read one part of the passage and not the whole thing. And now we're going to read the whole thing for once, right? What page are we on? Does anyone know? 1444. Thank you, Carol. There's a season for everything, a time for every experience under the heaven. As we said, what do these couplets mean? What are these couplets? They are said at funerals. That's exactly right. They are said at funerals. Thank you. Yes. Why? Why are they said at funerals? What are these couplets? I'm sorry? Carol, thank you. Beginnings and endings or opposites. They're couplets of opposites. What is human action according to these couplets? It is action of doing and undoing, of being and not being. Right? In other words, what is the ultimate consequence of these couplets? Life and the end of life. A return to a situation that had been before. We weren't here before, then we are here, then we're not here again. Right? In other words, it is the doing and the undoing. Yes? In other words, look at every couplet here. It is about human action, but what is the ultimate implication? The ultimate consequence of human action here? A return to the status quo ante. A return to what had been before. Yes? Which is one of the reasons for which this takes us back and is so powerful for us to read and for us to experience. Yes? So, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and uproot the planted, to slay and to heal, to tear down, to build up, to weep, to laugh, to wail, to dance, to throw stones and to gather stones. You see what I'm saying? Yes? All of these are couplets of opposites. And in each opposite we act and then we undo our own action. Yes? You see how this is constructed? Yes? These are couplets of what appear to be opposite. A time to rip and a time to sow, a time to be silent, a time to speak, a time to wage war and a time for peace. Yes? And this is, generally speaking, what we read out of chapter 3 of the book of Ecclesiastes. Right? Does this sound familiar? Is all of this familiar? And so moving and so special to us. Right? But then what happens in the book of Ecclesiastes? Does the passage end? No, except we don't read the rest of it, right? Let's take a look at what the rest of the passage says and see how revolutionary it is. What value then can we attain from our labors? Wait a minute. We gather stones and we move them away. We plant and we uproot the planted. We sow, and we rip that which had been sown. We work. We do all of this work. What is the fruit of our labors, right? Remember, there is a time for everything. There is a time for everything. The whole thing is about time. It's all about timing, right? So what at the end of the day is the fruit of our labors? After all this time, and after we've done everything we are supposed to do, when we're supposed to do it, right? I have observed the matter that God gave us to be concerned with. God brings everything to pass precisely at its time. God brings everything to pass. Who determines what is the time? God. God brings everything to pass at it. You think you're going to change history? You're going to change the course of history? You're going to undertake something? You decided this is the time? God brings everything to pass precisely at its time. God places eternity in our minds, but without us ever guessing. We don't know. We don't know from first to last all the things that God brings to pass. We just don't know. Where are we in the cycle? How do we know that it is time to act? How do we know that the temple is going to be built? How do we know that what we are going to look for and do is going to succeed? How do we know? How do we know that we're going to go wage a war and that we are going to win the war? How do we know? How do we know that everything we are trying to do will work? How do we know? How do we know that we're going to engage in an effort and it's going to yield because there's going to be no COVID and everybody will be back to normal and everything will be fine? How do we know? We don't know. And what is it that we don't know? We don't know where we are vis-a-vis time, God's time. God brings everything to pass in time. And we can't even guess. We don't know. What is Ecclesiastes telling us here? Our conception of time only works in retrospect, not in prospect. We don't know. What about the Deuteronomist? Just do the right thing and everything will be fine. The rain will come in its time. What about Hosea? The kingdom of Israel was destroyed. It's time to seek God, right? And wait. What about Haggai? Go build the temple now. Look, the circumstances have changed. What if we didn't listen to them? Would there be a state of Israel today? Would there be a United States of America? Would all the things that we have done, would they have happened had we had no initiative? I mean, can we just sit back and say, oh, we don't know anything, we can't predict, therefore we're going to slip into inaction? I mean, is that an option for us? But what does Ecclesiastes say? We don't know where we are in the cycle. We don't know whether we're up or down. We don't know God's plan. We don't know God's eternity. What is Ecclesiastes? The anti-Deuteronomy. What is our problem? An inability to understand time and our place in time. And therefore, our inability to predict. We can plan, we can try, and we do. And we can even make progress. But do we know how things are going to work out? Do we know in the long run which countries are going to survive and which countries are going to fall? Did you know 2 months ago that there's a possibility that there might not be a Ukraine at some point? I mean, did anyone see this coming? How do we know? How do we know? We don't know. Do we know in the long run? We don't know in the long run. And what is it, according to Ecclesiastes, that we really have to struggle with and to think about? Our relationship with time. Our place vis-a-vis time. Because there is a time to be born and a time to die. A time to sow and a time to reap. A time to gather stone and a time to take stones apart and put them away. A time to sow and a time to undo that which has been sown. We know that to be true. And we know that we can't predict these times. We know when they're here, but we don't control these times. There's wisdom in that. And in the sense that we can get overconsumed with our planning. We can become overconsumed with our sense of power and ability to change the world. And Ecclesiastes reminds us it's not quite so straightforward. And what it's about is time. We haven't figured out time. And we don't know whether it's our time or not. Now, what does this mean for us? We're going to stop everything, sit back and relax? Go home, have a cup of tea? No. No, of course not. But what does it mean for us? Go through this with a certain degree of humility. We don't control everything. We don't know. We react. We don't just act, we react. And the plans we make, let them be tentative as well. Let's not become fixated. We are not fully in charge. And there's nothing we can do about it, says Ecclesiastes. And here is the single most undermining message of the book to the rest of the Hebrew Bible. Because the implication of Ecclesiastes is, I cannot guarantee you that everything will be okay. Because I'm not in charge of time. I don't know time. And I don't know what God has in store for us in time. So all the promises that you've been made about the covenant and about the rain coming in time, the early rain and the late rain, and about the building of the temple, and about our politic, about everything else, I'm sorry, says Ecclesiastes. I don't know about these promises. And if we don't know, what is left for us? If we don't know that everything is going to be okay, what is left? Sorry? Sorry? Hope. Faith. Hope. Faith. When we don't know, we have to trust. We have to hope. Right? We have to do our best under the circumstances we find ourselves in, and trust and have faith and believe in each other's goodness. Believe that we can work together. Believe that we can do. It's not a matter of A will lead to B. It's a matter of understanding our place. This is the contribution of Ecclesiastes to Judaism. From this moment onwards, from here onwards, nothing is ever certain. And it's remarkable that one book in the Hebrew Bible, and only one of the shortest books in the Hebrew Bible, made this contribution to us. So not only is it don't trust Greek science, don't trust Greek philosophy, don't trust wisdom, don't trust ancient Near Eastern wisdom, right? Don't trust the book of Proverbs, as we have seen before. Don't trust the rest of the Hebrew Bible either, in the sense of a certainty. There are very few certainties out there. Now, don't stop. Don't sit home. Don't stop doing what you're doing. Don't stop being good people. But remember, it's not as simple as A will lead to B. You will hold up your part of the covenant and the rain will come. No, it doesn't work this way.
So how does one believe in God?
This is how one believes in God. This is how one believes in God. When you believe in God, do you believe in a certainty of certain things happening if you do X or Y?
But isn't that why people pray? Because they believe that God will take care of this?
Well, do we pray? Do we pray? I'm going to reiterate your question so that the people at home can hear it. Do we pray because we believe God will take care of our prayer? We have petitionary prayers. We ask for things and we pray because we are asking God to take care of our prayers. Or do we pray because we need to articulate for ourselves what it is that we need and what it is that we hope for and what it is that we would really like to see, and understand that these things may come to us sooner or later, or not. Right? What is this notion of prayer? You remember that the word prayer in Hebrew, to pray in Hebrew, lehit palel, is a reflexive word. It is a word that occurs that we engage in and for ourselves. Right? Tefillah is not just petitionary. Tefillah is an engagement with ourselves. It's a word that is anchored in the binyan, in the form of the Hebrew verb that is hitpa'el, right? A reflexive action, an action that we undertake in ourselves and for ourselves, right? Yes? Yes.
To me, this is a very pessimistic approach to life and reminds me of an old Yiddish saying, which my grandmother and mother used to say, that man plans and God laughs.
Well, man plans and God laughs is a Yiddish, an old Yiddish saying, right? Not so old, but a couple of 100 years old Yiddish saying that effectively is a restatement of this. In other words, we're not all powerful. Now, do I think this is pessimistic? No. Because I think this is the world we live in, and it doesn't mean we stop. It doesn't mean we lose faith. It doesn't mean that we go back and crawl under the covers. It means that we act in the way that we are supposed to act. We do the right things because they are the right things. We try our hardest. We deal with the circumstances at hand, and we have to hope and trust that other people will do the same. And look at the progress that we have made. Look at the progress we have made. We are together. We are here. Wait a minute, it's not all dark. And at the same time, we are not fully in control. Okay. And the covenant is not some kind of a promise. Right? The covenant is not just you do A and B will happen. It's not that kind of equation. It's more complicated than that. And you know what? We don't teach this to our children, because what we teach to our children is Deuteronomy. But perhaps this would be better preparation for their lives. Is that negative? No. Is that pessimistic? No. But it is realistic. Right? And it is who we are, and it's not about us deciding that, that's it, we're just going to take care of ourselves and everything else can go to hell. No, of course not. But it is understanding the Jewish contribution to the world. The promise of redemption is uncertain. We don't know its time. Right? That's the truth of it. Right? And Christianity is very different. How do they deal with it? Differently. Much of Christianity comes to, in certain ways, undo Ecclesiastes. It's difficult to deal with, but it is so true. It is so true. And in certain ways, I think, and I hope you will agree with me, Mel, I really am sorry that you feel the way you feel about this. I actually think there's something empowering about this learning. I think it's important for us to understand. And I think that not only is it empowering, there's something remarkable about so many people doing the right things in the context of uncertainty. And of the ability to see uncertainty, to look at it in the eye. I think it's remarkable. Let me take a look and see if I have any questions here. I don't think so. I don't think so. Yes.
In Auschwitz, in many of the books that I've read, a lot of the prisoners they went back and forth about Ecclesiastes. And there were positives and negatives about the way they approached it. And we can see why. But this is one of the parts of the Bible they discussed over and over again.
And now we understand why. That's exactly right. So in the aftermath of the Holocaust, whether it's Elie Wiesel, or whether it's Primo Levi, or whether it's a whole number of other writers and other theologians, they refer back to Ecclesiastes. Again, I'm repeating your words so that people at home can hear them. That's right. That's right. Because there are moments where the unimaginable, the unbelievable, the unfathomable occurs. And we don't know. And we're not always able to see this coming. So, Etty, yeah.
My son is an agnostic, and he says, this is what proves that there is no God. How do I answer it to him? What do I respond?
So the question is, Etty is saying her son is an agnostic, and he says this is proof that there is no God, right? And my response to your son would be, first of all, I would not try to alter your son's view in this regard. One of the things that I would wish to do is to sit with him and to reinforce your son, right? But to ask your son not about God, but about God with an additional O. To ask your son about good. Not God, but good. Instead of one O, another O. A 2-O God, right? And ask your son whether he believes in God or not. Does your son believe in good? Right? Do we have faith in good? Now, do we know that good will ultimately prevail? Do we know that justice will ultimately prevail? But will that stop us from doing good? Does that undermine our faith in good? And I think therein lies your answer.
That kind of takes me back, or takes him back to the ancient Greeks.
It takes us back to the ancient Greeks, except that the ancient Greeks were people of faith. They believed in their gods, and they believed in their capacity to change the world, granted to them by their gods. So yes, Etty, it takes us back to the ancient Greeks, right? But this, in many ways, goes even further than the Greeks. Right? And this, in many ways, becomes the foundation of our Judaism, of who we are. We don't pretend to certainties. And at the same time, we continue. And some would argue that that is where God lies. In our ability to continue to have faith in goodness and to continue to act to advance goodness. But I wouldn't argue with your son. No. As I said, we have not done Ecclesiastes justice. There was no way we could do Ecclesiastes justice in 4 sessions. But at least what I hope is that you've acquired a taste and that you've understood the depth of Ecclesiastes and the magic of Ecclesiastes and the audacity of Ecclesiastes. And I'm so grateful for being able to share this with you. So thank you.
I don't know, it'll come through. It'll come through.
Everybody knows about that.
There's some paper at the desk up there.
And when you stop to think about it,
Sign and put in somebody's office.
but I knew it was